Hey, besties and bosses. Happy Tuesday. How are y'all doing? I feel like, I don't want to assume, but I imagine for many of you, most of you, it's probably been a very heavy, very intense last couple of days. I think we've been mostly for all the clients I've been speaking to, and I know for the people in my personal life and just myself as well, I think I've been processing the Roe versus Wade overturn ruling the last few days. So I want to, not what we're talking about today, that's not what our live stream is today, but it feels very strange not to acknowledge that that is what's going on in our world. I think it's very real for everyone in the US. I think we're all feeling that in different ways. So I want to acknowledge that. I know we dropped a thread in here, actually posted on Instagram over the weekend. I forgot to drop it in here. I think we dropped it in here last night with some resources for those of you who just want some places you can get into action. Obviously, take care of you process first, and I would invite everyone who then feels called to either get back into action or to get into action to do so. I know my husband and I, for just to have some insight into what we're doing, we made a donation this weekend to Planned Parenthood, and we are, after this live stream, we have a dinner date, and then we are going to vote. I know many of you probably have, if you're in the US, I believe it's primaries most areas. So that is something I would invite everyone to look into if you haven't already. Definitely a great reminder to go vote. It is one of the best ways to have our voices be more heard. I'm all about us talking on social media, but voting is one of the best things we can all do. So highly encourage, inspire, motivate, whatever the right word is there, for you to check into if you have those locals, those primary elections. Use this as a time to go vote. If you are able to, and that is something within your means to donate. Obviously, there are ways to donate without monetary means. There's volunteering. There are other ways to have your voice heard. Call your senator, right? And speak to your local government. I think there's a lot of things like that we can all do as well. And then one of the biggest things that I put in this thread, but something that I'm always mindful when we have things happen in our world, I feel like I'm always humbled by how much I still have to learn and to educate myself. So that's something I'm committed to always, is continuing to educate myself and to look to those who notice so much more about issues than I do. I feel like I always notice a thin slice and want to learn more. So that's something I'm committed to as well, and want to share with all of you that I'm very, very committed to continue to do my education piece of it, because I would not even pretend to be an expert in this world. Hey, Emma, for some reason it's showing me that you're live. Sometimes it tells me who's live and who's not. Anyway, so I wanted to acknowledge that in the group, acknowledge that this group is a space that I very much welcome conversation for resources. And this is not a group where I want us to have debates and have anything that is not in support of one another, but absolutely, I shared that thread. If anyone has resources they want to share, places they're learning from that they want to share, other resources in terms of being able to be of support, absolutely feel free to use this group for that and to have conversations that are supportive. Absolutely an invitation for that. Conversations that are helping you process, to be seen, to be heard, to be witnessed. All of that is very much welcome in this group. Anything that is in supportive of one another, that we won't allow in the group, and anything that is harmful to one another or disrespectful, those threads will be deleted. We're not available for that in this group. So did want to acknowledge that, acknowledge all of you, acknowledge the global processing and experience we're all in, and also acknowledge my where I'm at in this journey, and make that commitment to all of you that I'm actively working to continue to do better, because that's something that I always have an opportunity to do. And then we will pivot into today's conversation, because we are also going to talk one of the things I am an expert in, and something I'm excited to share with you. And we're going to talk more about sustainably scaling your business and the different stages of business, how to rock each stage of business. And then one of the conversations I really wanted to break down that I think is fun, it's one of my favorite topics, but the way I look at moving from building, growing, and scaling your business, it's a really simple 3-step process or framework you can use that I find is very uncomplicated. It's very simple. We're all about simple over here. And just a way you can really think about those stages of business to really help you understand what to focus on at any given stage, what to delete, what to delegate, what to automate, maybe when it's time to bring on team, when it's not time to bring on team. So you're continuing to be at each stage without sabotaging yourself, and also allowing yourself to set yourself up for that next stage for more income. When I think about scaling in business, I think, yes, it's about making more money, but so much of it is really about how are you, literally what it sounds like. If we think about a business, a building scales and height, it it uses the same foundation, right? And then scales upward is the way I always think about it. And when we think about business, it's sort of the same thing. It's not how can we spread out and do more work and have to work more and more to make more money. That's always an option. But I think about scaling upwards in terms of how can you use one foundation, one building, and scale upwards, increase your income, increase your impact, increase your height, right? Breakthroughs, smash through is the word I'm looking for, those income ceilings to grow higher without having to dig a new foundation, do more work. It is a little bit of working smarter, not harder, I think is part of that mentality we hear so much about, but it's also really looking at how you can leverage that foundation, that business you've already built to bring in more revenue. So we're gonna talk through that a little bit today, and then also talk through just one of the really common ways I see really smart, ambitious business owners unintentionally sabotage their ability to grow and scale. And it probably isn't what you think, though I'd be curious to hear what you think. Before I go too far into our conversation, I always forget to do this until about halfway through. We do a giveaway every live stream, and all you have to do is say hi, leave an emoji in the comments, give me a heart, one of the praise hands, whatever you want. You can say hi, you can leave a comment, anything enters you in for the drawing we have every week. This week, we're giving away one copy of my 6-week self-study sales course, Sell Out Without Feeling Like a Sellout. It is, I think, a really great freaking course. It walks you through the mindset and strategy of mastering the art of selling without the ick factor. We walk through the mindset, clarity, strategy, and action of sales, and really using the philosophy and framework I use in my own business and that I support my clients with, which really focuses on a service-based sales approach and a really psychological-based, human-based approach to sales. And it works really well, and it's something I'm obsessed with. So leave a comment, leave, any of the flag signals in the comments, you will be entered, and we usually pick those winners on Thursday, and we'll notify you by DM. And if you don't want it for any reason, you can pass it along to someone else. For those of you who don't win, we are officially, my team has been lovely in getting, this used to be something we gave away, we've turned it into a really low investment course for you. It's going to be $99. I wanted you to have a little skin in the game because I found so many people took this course for free and weren't completing it, and I know it can help you, so we've made it $99. It could easily be $1,000 or $2,000, just so you have a little skin in the game and incentive to actually finish the course material. So we will have that up, I think, by the end of this week for those of you who want to grab that and get access to it. You can get instant access to all 6 weeks. Believe it's kimargetsinger.com/sell-out, and that'll be at the end of this week for those of you who don't win the free copy of it. Okay, so let's talk sustainable scaling. Let's talk the stages of business building, growing, and scaling. So I think something we hear so often in our business space, it's something I really subscribe to and believe is the philosophy, the idea that what got you here won't get you to where you go next. You raise your hand if you've ever heard that before. And I think that is very true. And I think it is also sometimes a confusing statement. And it's sort of like, okay, so if what got me here won't get me to where I want to go next, what will get me to where I want to go next? And what the heck does that actually mean? So we're going to break that down a little bit as we go through this concept, this framework, this 3-step process you can play with to look at your business as you move through the levels of business, as well as kind of what each stage of business requires of you. Because I do think there's a really big difference between building your business and scaling your business. And I think sometimes in our online space, I love our online space. It is such a gift. We have so many resources at our fingertips. We have, so many things available to us. I think there's so much information. I get to hang out with you live here today. We get to have these conversations. I think it's such a wonderful thing, the amount of resources we can share. And I think because there's so much noise, so much information, so much that we have available to us, sometimes we can almost be focused on the I don't want to even say the wrong thing, but the phase of business we're not in. And I think we can also sometimes be in a rush if we're building to want to be scaling, or if we're like, we can just want to jump ahead of where we're at and think that one place is better than another. And it feels so important to say these are simply growth phases in your business. One stage is not better than another stage. There are glorious, fantastic parts about building, about growing, and about scaling. I loved my building phase in my business, and I'm so glad I allowed myself to enjoy that phase and to really sink into the enjoyment of it, because that phase is done now, right? Like if I had just like wanted to be somewhere else, I would have missed out on so much of the exciting, the wonderful parts of that will not be at this stage in business. And so really want to be mindful as we're talking through this today, because I do think that happens sometimes. And raise your hand if you've ever experienced that, where maybe you're building, but you hear people talking about scaling, and it almost can make you feel like, oh, I'm wrong for being in the building phase, or like I need to hurry up and get there. And I really, really want to invite everyone here to remember business isn't a race. We talk about this so often here. There's not a prize for whoever gets there faster or sooner. Yes, I want you to make great money, take home great money, great profit, doing the work you love, but it's also not a race. And I think sometimes that racing mentality that it's almost like so many of you, I think, try to want to get out of the corporate space. I was never in the corporate space, which is why I only say you. I've had like a real job, but never a corporate job. And I had a real job for a hot second. But I think so often if you're in the corporate space, right, many people want to move into having their own business because they want to get out of that rat race mentality. They want to get out of that like climbing the corporate ladder, like chasing mentality, only to find it's replaced in the online space. And it's just a new kind of rat race. It's a new kind of race to try to like get to there faster. And just want to remind you what a trap that is. And the sooner you can get out of that race and really be on your own path, on your own race, the better it feels. And honestly, the easier it is to move to each stage of business. But I think the more you also enjoy each stage of business you're at, it's the whole concept of how you build it's how you're going to sustain it, the more sustainability you're going to have in your business, the more overall enjoyment you're going to have in your business. I talk so much about creating success on your terms, and I think that's where part of the on your terms piece comes from. I know because I thoroughly allowed myself to enjoy building, it's allowed me to now, whereas we're scaling and we're in this phase, I've built something in a way where it's like, I just love every phase. I'm not in a rush to get away from it. It really genuinely feels on my terms. So that feels very important to say. I also, I feel like there we go. Is the light going crazy for you guys there? Okay. The light on my screen, it's very interesting how this is different every week. I feel like Facebook changes those things, but I think I'm back in the light. So that feels really important to speak to and to be really mindful here as we're having this conversation. One stage is not better than the other. Be where you're at and enjoy that, embrace that. That's what's going to make it that much easier to get to the next phase. But again, this is not like the goal is go from build to grow to scale as quickly as possible. It's embrace each stage of business you're at. And the reason I say this is actually, we'll talk about this piece first. One of the ways I see business owners sabotage their ability to scale and their businesses the most is actually getting stuck in this race and wanting to scale before their business is ready to scale. I feel like we had a conversation about this. It might have been here on the podcast not too long ago. But I'm going to use the building example. I feel like I use this all the time, but I think it's actually a really helpful way to think about it. If you think about a skyscraper, right? A skyscraper scales in terms of height. It needs to dig into the ground, dig a foundation, lay a foundation, build that first solid ground level before it can scale. And if it rushes to scale, and if it tries to scale super tall before it's before it's ready, what happens is you have a really weak foundation. It's super shoddy. It's so much more likely that building is not going to, it like won't even have the ability to scale. And if it does, that it's going to topple over. And I see that happen in business so often. There's such a race to scale. There's such a race to like quickly get into that phase for ego reasons, for scarcity reasons, that the building phase is just glossed over, the growing phase is just glossed over, and people will try to do, or business owners will want to try to implement scaling strategies when that's not what their business needs. And it's sort of like, I'll use myself as an example. I have a one-on-one business model. Many of you know that. When I was first in my building phase of business, and one-on-one is really what made sense to build my business with. Let's say I had wanted to, I don't want to, but let's just say I had wanted to have a group coaching program and to, have lots of additional programs. And that was going to be my strategy to scale, was to offer a one-to-many offer. I think that's pretty common for many coaches. That's a model many of my clients have. if when I was building that one-on-one foundation, if I kind of jumped over that because I was like in such a rush to scale and jumped right to scaling into offering this next scaling offer of group programs and then like jumping into another offer and just kind of like jumping, trying to jump to that scaling offer, likely it would have been very, very challenging for me to even sustain building my business because my business didn't have the foundation to support those multiple offers. That probably would have been really confusing and conflicting offers that would have competed with one another. I probably wouldn't have had the different pieces in place, the sustainable reoccurring revenue to support scaling and adding on additional offers. And so I think that's just a great example there. Whereas because that's not the model I used to scale, but had that been the model I had used to scale and I had jumped to scaling before building and growing, it would have been a really great way to either sabotage my business completely or to really slow down my ability to grow in the first place. In fact, we've definitely done some of the biggest mistakes I learned my first year in business. I did sabotage my first year in business, and one of the things I did, well, I'm grateful for the lessons from kind of testing every business model because I learned so much about what I like and what I don't like. I did try to do some of those things, right? I tried to launch, I did launch a group program, a membership program, quite a few offers my first year in business, and it absolutely slowed down my ability to grow my business. As soon as I stopped trying to scale before I was ready, the irony is my business grew so much faster. That's when I started having those those 5-figure months for the first time on a reoccurring basis. So that is something I really wanted to touch on before we go through the 3-step process or the framework there for you. So let me know if that makes sense. And this is not to discourage anyone from having membership models or from having group programs or from having whatever your scaling option or offer is. It is not to discourage anyone. It is not to say you can't even start with an offer like that. But usually what I find for most business owners, there is an exception to every single rule. I'm all about questioning the rules, breaking the rules. But in general, what I find for most businesses as we're building, growing, and scaling, it generally makes sense for us to have one core offer and one core message and one core problem we're solving that we continue to sell until we're making usually at least 100K of reoccurring revenue easily before adding on another offer to scale. Now, just so this isn't confusing, when I say one core offer, you might have some offers you splinter off of that funnel into that larger offer as a part of your sales or customer or buyer's journey. I think that's very different because those offers aren't competing with one another. They're all really a part of one offer. I'm just gonna use myself as an example because it's just easier. I know my business really well. I sell ongoing coaching, right? We have a 6-month program to start. Many of my clients work with me and renew and work with me long term, but that's kind of my core foundational offer. But I also offer a coaching intensive. That's not a different offer. It's really splintered off and really meant to roll into my long-term offer. It's all a part of the same general core offer I have. And so they don't compete with one another. What would be competing or what would be kind of scaling before I was ready is what we were talking about earlier, is if I had said this is my core offer, I wasn't bringing in that reoccurring consistent revenue yet, and I was like, but I'm going to offer a group program as well, and I'm going to offer a membership, right? Suddenly my focus would be very splintered. My sales focus would be splintered. My audience focus would be splintered. And again, it doesn't mean you have to start with one-on-one. I have clients who have started with group coaching programs as their core offer, but I think just so you can understand what we're talking about a little bit here, and so we're all on the same page. Again, that is a general rule of thumb. I'm so not a rules person. If you know me and my work, you know I'm all about you get to make your own effing rules. We like to be an exception to the rule. We like to blow rules and stats out of the water over here. Most of my clients do. But just as kind of so we have a general way to think about this. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know if that resonates. But let's talk about this 3-step process. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. Y'all probably have heard me talk about Gay Hendricks' work before and The Big Leap, and so I want to make sure, one of my clients teases me because I always say I want to give credit where credit is due, but I want to give credit where credit is due. Always feels so important to me to make sure I am properly citing sources that are kind of where things come from. So this general concept originally comes from Gay Hendricks, and I sort of modified it for us to use in business. So Gay Hendricks in The Big Leap talks a lot about your zone of genius, your zone of excellence, and your zone of competence as three different, hey Lanita, nice to see you here. It's so fun for some reason today. It's telling me who's hopping on for a second, so nice to see you. And nice to have you here. And a reminder for everyone, if you leave a comment, leave anything below, you'll be entered for our giveaway. This week is the 6-week sales course, Sell Out Without Feeling Like a Sellout. So Gay Hendricks this is what he talks about in The Big Leap. This is his concept, and this is the framework I love to use and apply. We're kind of borrowing it from him, and we are applying it to business and going through the stages of scaling, building, growing, and scaling your business. Hi back. And I'll explain what these are and then how we can apply this to business, because I think it can almost be like, wait a second, I can't understand those concepts. How the heck does this apply to business? I'm going to walk you through all of this. This is my application of someone else's concept. So we're kind of marrying those two together. So just so we're on the same page, in case you don't know what these concepts are, I'll explain those first and then how I think about them through the lens of business. So generally speaking, we all, per Gay Hendricks, our zone of genius, this is the work that lights you up. It's the work you were put on this earth to do. It is the work you are the best at in your business. It's the stuff when you look at your business that really only you can do. And oftentimes I find with clients, zone of genius work can be a little confusing too, because it's often also the thing that tends to come easy is to you. Sometimes it's something you might not even notice is your genius because you're so close to it. It's so familiar to you. Feels so effortless to you. It might not be effortless, but it might feel so effortless to you or so in alignment for you that it's almost easy to miss. I find that is oftentimes I reflect things to clients and they're like, wait a second, really? Because it's just, we're just so close to our own zone of genius. Your zone of excellence is oftentimes actually the work you're more familiar that you're good at. This is the work you can do really, really well. This is often where I find most business owners get stuck because again, I think our zone of genius is oftentimes that piece we could not be aware of, or zone of genius work can also often be the thing that feels a little scarier and stretchy to own and to step into and to take up space around. Zone of excellence work is the work you're really great at. You can do really, really, really well. Like you are better than average at it. I think it can be confused with zone of genius. And this is the work that usually feels a little safer to do. It is the work you usually can get compensated really well for. It is the work that oftentimes if you've had a job somewhere else, I find a lot of times the jobs we get in employment somewhere else often are our zone of excellence work. Sometimes we can have work that is in our zone of genius. When I was acting, I think that is one of my zone of geniuses. So when I got hired for acting, right, that would have been my zone of genius work. But when, let's say I was casting on a film, I was great at casting. It was adjacent to what I was doing. That was a zone of excellence role for me. And then we have our zone of competence work. Our zone of competence work is the stuff that we can do. We can figure it out. It usually is a lot more of a grind to figure out. It usually takes a lot more work. It's usually the stuff we're not that great at. This is usually kind of the easiest to identify because it's also usually the stuff that's just like feels like a slog to get done. And I know for me, like zone of excellence work is like tinkering on the back end of my website or like doing anything techy. I can do it. I can figure it out. I have the mental capacity for it. I am very, very smart. I can, figure that out and I can execute it, but it is so much more draining for me. It takes me a little bit more mental effort. If I'm going to do that, I have to just think that much harder to do those things. So I can do it. It's just a lot more work. Hey Heather, nice to see you. It's so fun. It's telling me who's here today. I love it. I hope that's not weird for all of you that I know who's here. It doesn't usually do this, but it's telling me as people are hopping on. Anyway, so nice. Just want to say hi because it's nice to see familiar names. I can kind of see your face. So nice to see familiar faces as well. So that's kind of a loose breakdown. I'm probably butchering the way Gay Hendricks explains it, but this is the way I internalize it as it relates to business. Now, when it comes to building, growing, and scaling, what I find is really beautiful about understanding these three ways we show up in work is I think this can become a really great framework to understand how to move through your different phases of business and how to, as we were talking earlier, how not to scale before you're ready to scale, or how to know what that would even mean and what to focus on. So I'm going to explain how I see this process with building, growing, and scaling, and then we'll walk through each of those phases a little bit just so you can have a better understanding kind of what's I don't even want to say required, but what I find to be most beneficial at each stage in business. And hopefully this will resonate. I personally, this makes my brain very excited, but I hope it makes all of you as excited, because I feel like it just simplifies things, because sometimes online it can just be very like, these are like the 17 things you need to do to scale, and I feel like it can get a little more complicated than it needs to be. So the way I think about this is, at every stage of business, our goal, or in all of business, our goal is to look more and more to how we can keep shifting the percentage of time that we spend in our business more and more to our zone of genius, and continue to shift more and more things down to our zone of excellence, and the things that are in our zone of competence to either delete those, to automate those, to delegate those, to, or to get rid of them. Right? So our goal, right, this hopefully makes sense, is to, as we build, grow, and scale, is to continue to look for how we can increase the percentage, the amount of time we spend in our business in zone of genius work, and to decrease the percentage of time, the amount of time we spend in zone of excellence work and zone of competence work. And at each stage of business, we are ideally looking to expand that zone of genius time and continue to decrease zone of excellence time and zone of, hopefully, by the time you're scaling, the zone of competence work has been completely moved out. Now, got lots of caveats, lots of nuances here. First and foremost, I think what's really important to understand is your zone of genius work, as you go from building, growing, and scaling, ideally, that is your time spent in that is going to expand, right? We want the percentage to expand. However, the type of work that fits in your zone of genius, while that time might expand, ideally that work is likely going to get more and more narrow. And what usually happens, so hopefully that makes sense, right? So the amount of time, the actual hours, not that you have to work more hours, but the percentage of time, I should say, you spend in your business, the zone of genius time, we want that to expand. But the actual context, the actual content of that time, the actual focus of that time, what that zone of genius work is, ideally, as you move from building, growing, and scaling, as you continue to expand in your business, while that zone of genius time is expanding, we want to keep narrowing in on that zone of genius work. And ideally what is happening is, as you're narrowing in on your zone of genius work, as you're moving through building, growing, and scaling, what you're doing then is you're taking some of what used to be considered zone of genius work and you're pushing it into your zone of excellence space, right? Because we want to get more and more specialized. We want to dive deeper and deeper into what really is our zone of genius. And our zone of genius really should get narrow and just be a core few things that we go really deep into. And oftentimes what I find is when we're in, let's say, the building phase, there's a lot of things that kind of hang out in our zone of genius. And as you deepen into your work, as you deepen into your craft, as you deepen into whatever that is you do, you'll notice a lot of your zone of genius things that you think are zone of genius really are things that are your zone of excellence, that are kind of masquerading, hiding out in your zone of genius. And so as you go into growing, right, we want to narrow into zone of genius. We're going to push some of that stuff into zone of excellence. So what happens usually is your zone of excellence is probably just going to get larger and larger with all of these things you're really, really great at. And you can do really, really well, but they're not your genius. So usually when you're in the growing phase of your business, there's probably going to be, the zone of genius is getting more narrow. There's probably still a ton of zone of excellence work you're doing. I'll give a great example here. When I started my business, I would say I thought that my zone of genius, part of my zone of genius, it was writing content. I think I'm really great at writing content. I help clients with that quite a bit. However, as I've gone from I think I'm still great at writing content, right? But as I go from building to growing to scaling my business, what I've seen is my zone of genius gets deeper and deeper into coaching, into supporting clients, into mindset, into strategy, into the actual coaching, and into what I find to be higher level forms of content and communicating. I think I'm an excellent writer. However, that has moved to my zone of excellence. It used to be something I held on to as a zone of genius skill of mine. And I really think it has now been moved into zone of excellence, which really helps my brain as I'm scaling, because if I know, oh, wait a second, this is no longer, I'm moving that into my zone of excellence. As we're moving up from building to growing to scaling, by the time we're at the scaling phase, we're ideally moving things down that also, once we're in zone of competence, zone of excellence, these are things we also want to start outsourcing or getting rid of in our business. Hopefully that example makes sense for you. How you can see how something maybe at one stage of your business seems like, this is my genius, I'm so great at it, I'm excellent at it. I think I'm excellent at writing content. We're talking about writing content in particular. I think I'm really great at that. And I don't know that I would say that is my zone of genius. That is not the thing that maybe lights me up the most. That is not the thing that I was put on this earth to do. That is not the thing that I can best support people with, that only I can do in my business, that people should pay me for, right? People can pay me for that. I think this is where it gets confusing with zone of excellence. In fact, at one point in my life, it was probably easier for me to get paid for my zone of excellence. Writing is a very marketable skill. I remember, I've shared this before, kind of sidebar here, but I think this is a great example of how zone of excellence gets confused for zone of genius, and how at a certain stage in our business, oftentimes it's scary to lean into zone of genius, because zone of excellence often seems like it's what's more monetizable. It's often our shadow, a part of our, it's when we're in the shadow role of our work. I remember when I was growing my business, so I moved past building my business and building the foundation, I was growing and getting fully booked. I got an offer to do copywriting, to do writing for a business that I really love and respect, and they were going to pay me a really great 5-figure salary to do just content creation, basically. But in order to take that job, I would not be able to have had my own business. So what I would have had to do, I was not making 5 figures yet at that time. I was growing my business, not making 5 figures yet at my business. And it was this really interesting time where I had to sit with, do I want to trade my zone of genius in for a secure paycheck in my zone of excellence? And it was actually really helpful to think through it that way, because it made it actually very clear to me. I knew my job was to move. I've always had this philosophy, right? To move more and more into my zone of genius. And that's the place I want to monetize, and to be really aware of that difference, and to honor my zone of excellence. But the idea is to expand the amount of time I'm spending in my zone of genius, and less time that I'm spending in my zone of excellence, and to farm more things that I think are my zone of genius into that zone of excellence pool. And that was a really great example of that, and actually a place where it highlighted for me, I am excellent, right, at writing content. Someone wants to pay me 5 figures a month for that. That's great. What a beautiful opportunity to get paid really well for my zone of excellence. And I probably could have been incredibly happy doing that. However, that would have been really trading my zone of genius for my zone of excellence. And the truth is, that would have been selling me short. That would have been selling my joy short. That would have been selling making money on my terms short. That would have also limited my capacity for income, because while it's scarier, this is what Gay Hendricks talks about, right? It's scarier to make that leap into your zone of genius usually, right? It's usually safer in our zone of excellence. It usually it appears like it's easier to monetize. There's usually a cap and a ceiling there. And the scalability, the limitless money, the making money on your terms, I make multi-6 figures, I make far more than I would have ever made if I had taken that job. For someone else who that's your zone of genius, the reverse would be true, right? But because I decided to lean into my zone of genius, that's what allowed me to both grow and scale my business and make far more income. Does that concept make sense? In my brain, I can almost see this as a visual, and I'm hoping that I'm describing this visual in a way that is connecting for all of you, and just understanding kind of those different components and how easy it is to confuse them, and how that would have actually been operating from a place of scarcity and fear had I chosen that role to stay in my zone of excellence. And it really would have cost me not only my zone of genius, but again, I would have been making decisions from fear and from scarcity that would have also cost me the ability to eventually scale my business and make money on my terms. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So again, what we're thinking about is at each stage of business, how can we get more and more clear of that zone of genius and move into that more and more, where we're expanding our time in our zone of genius, but also narrowing what our zone of genius is. Now, if we think about building your business, I think I want to walk through each stage of business a little bit because I do think this looks a tiny bit different at each stage of business. And I think this is important to highlight. When you're building your business, and when I think of building your business, I really think about building the foundation of your business. This is when we're getting clear on, gosh, this is, I think, the hardest phase of business, quite honestly. So if you're in the building phase of business and it feels like it's hard, because I know everyone talks about how easy business is. Look, I think my business at this stage is super easy or easeful or whatever the word we want to use there is. I think it is a bunch of BS when people say building a business is easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it. I think it is the hardest phase of business, not to create a story, just to normalize. If you're in that, I think it is, maybe I should say challenging. I think we don't have to make it harder than it needs to be. And I think it is so worth it. And I think it is more challenging because oftentimes we are wearing so many hats. We're having to build a foundation, right? This is when you're getting clear on your messaging, your marketing strategy, your sales process, what your offers are, what your pricing is, right? You're building that whole foundation for your business and you're building everything you need for it to be profitable, for it to be something you can monetize and bring in income and kind of on a rinse and repeat basis. When you're in that phase, when we're in the building phase of business, this is when we are often wearing the most hats, and we're both we're the CEO and we're the employee and we're the person on the conveyor belt, doing all the tinkering and doing all the things. We're also often in the building phase. Yes, we're looking at what is our zone of genius and how can we monetize that and how can we build a business that is going to have an ability to grow and scale around our zone of genius. But we're often also really asked to also be in our zone of excellence and our zone of competence, and that's not wrong. I really think that's doing it right. And I think this is where we talked a little bit earlier about almost like wanting to scale before your foundation is there and sturdy to support you, how that can become something that sabotages you in business. Yes, we want to look at how can we maximize time and zone of genius. And I think when you're in the building phase of business, allowing there to be that split between zone of genius, zone of excellence, and zone of competence for a temporary moment can actually be very valuable. And being aware of what those things are. So as soon as you're ready to grow, you know where to shift those percentages and kind of what to move through. Generally speaking, as we move from building your business to growing your business, this is when you've got your foundation in place, right? And we're starting to get fully booked, or we're starting to, if you have a group program, fill a group program and get it into that place where it is bringing reliable income in on repeat. We're maybe not scaling yet, but we are growing the income, we're growing the business, we're growing that sustainability in your business. That is when I think it's really valuable to start to look at, great, how can I shift into more of my zone of genius, move things into my zone of excellence? And that's usually the phase where we also want to shift things that used to be in your zone of excellence are now going to move into your zone of competence, right? If we're expanding our zone of genius and narrowing that in, and we had to shove a couple things down to the zone of excellence pool, and the zone of excellence pool got bigger, we want to look at the zone of excellence pool and think, well, now what's in my zone of excellence that I can move to my zone of competence? And your zone of competence bucket is always the place we're first looking at. What can I delete? What can I delegate? What can I automate? So let me rewind the tape too. When you're building, the reason I say we're generally going to be a little bit in all of those pockets is, for the most part, most business owners are usually more kind of time resource, sweat equity resource than financially resourced when they're building their business, because there's not profit coming, or there's not revenue and profit coming through the business yet, right? There's not a bunch of money coming through. This is normal. This is every business ever. I think our online space is actually ahead of the curve. If you have more of a brick and mortar business, if we look at traditional corporations outside of most of us here, I think, are service-based business owners. The build phase, where we're kind of building that engine to bring in revenue, that can often, a lot of larger businesses have to get massive loans to be able to build this engine and support it, and it require a lot more resources. So That's super normal for most of us, not everyone, but for most of us, we are usually a little bit more time and sweat equity resource at the start, which often means it makes practical sense to lean into some of those zone of competence tasks that really maybe you're not the best at, but it makes financial sense for your business for a temporary short term. Before you're going into the growing phase, before you start to outsource. I hope this is making sense as a way to describe this. Let me know if you have questions and you need to explain what I mean a little bit more. I do think sometimes in the building phase of business, look, I have a team. I think investing in coaching support and team support, to me, two non-negotiables as you're building, growing, and scaling your business. I know for many business owners, it makes practical sense and it supports their business more because of the financial resources to usually invest in some sort of coaching support first, because that allows them to get the infrastructure so they can bring in revenue, and then to invest in team to do some of what their team might do in those zone of competence tasks until they're able to bring on team. And I find this can be beneficial for most business owners. Again, we have, break all the rules in your business. I definitely have clients who've hired on team support for that zone of competence area right from the get-go because they have kids at home or they're working a busy side job. There's lots of reasons where that makes sense. So this is not, I don't know everyone's business here. This is not across the board. But I do find in the building phase, having a short amount of time in some of those zone of competence tasks can actually be really helpful as a business owner. So you know what you're hiring for, and so you know what you're delegating out, so you don't feel so handcuffed to your team. Even if you're gonna, I have an OBM who supports, you met Katrina a couple weeks ago here, who supports me with a lot of team, and she's doing at this point a lot of the delegating for me. But it was really beneficial at a certain point for me before I had her to know what some of those things are so I could manage, bring on team, manage them and support them. So I do think at the build phase that looks a little differently. However, when we're in the build phase, we still want to look at what's my zone of genius. That's still the place I need to focus everything I'm building around. Still the place I want to make sure I'm focusing my most time and energy. Zone of excellence, want to be aware of those things. Those are probably things that make sense for me to do. That zone of competence, while it might be a smaller zone of competence at that level, though, and you might be taking on some of those roles, that is also, remember, one of the things we can do with zone of competence is not just delegating, but it is delete and automate. And so when you're in the building phase, what I think is really valuable when we're looking at this framework is getting really clear on zone of genius, zone of excellence, zone of competence, and looking within your zone of competence, where are the opportunities for you to delete tasks? I'm pretty sure almost every business has, I'm sure myself included, if we look at my business, and this is something we focus on regularly, has zone of competence tasks that are being done that really just aren't necessary. Most businesses are more complicated than they need to be. I preach simplicity. I am always helping clients streamline. That's what we do in my business. And I had a team meeting, I think just this week, and we were looking at where are more places to streamline. So streamlining as a part of deleting, right? So at the start, you can do yourself a favor and see, is there anything I can delete here? Chances are, I would put some money down that chances are most of you have an opportunity to delete at least one zone of competence task that just isn't necessary. It's not actually generating revenue in your business. And then we look at automating, right? This is usually the most inexpensive way to outsource some of those zone of competence tasks in your business to speed up your building process and to allow for more capacity in your zone of genius and zone of excellence work. Automating things like receiving payment or scheduling. I think scheduling is actually one of the things that people can hold on to for a surprising long time. And it's usually relatively inexpensive to set up some sort of scheduling software that can be automated for you or that can bill for you, right? These are really simple things. We're usually talking, less than $100 a month. Oftentimes it's less than $20 a month. So yes, there is an expense, but it's far less than bringing on team, which allows you to free up time and space. So you are expanding the amount of time, again, in your zone of genius and your zone of excellence at this point. Are we tracking with this? Which means then as we go into growing, once you've got that Sorry, my cat's in here. She wants to eat. She's throwing things around. Once we are finished building that foundation and you're moving into growing, oftentimes as you're now growing your business, what happens is you're generally spending more time serving people, right? Delivering your product. We are spending more time. We're no longer building the same way. We are now needing to spend a different energy and focus in our business. And yes, we want to spend both time in and on the business, but this is where we want to start to look at how are you more in your CEO role, right? This is like zone of genius is your CEO role, but also how are you in, if you are in, so I'll use me as an example. I have to be both work in my business and on my business. When I'm being a CEO and I'm in my zone of genius, I'm working on my business. But part of my genius is also being in my business in service, because I literally work with clients one-on-one. For some of you, you're going to move more and more just to working on your business. I'm not in it so much as you sustainably grow and scale. But again, this is where we're looking at when you're in the growing phase. This is usually what I would say, when is the time we again want to shift more. What's the opportunity to move more into your zone of genius? You're going to take some of your zone of genius, move it to your zone of excellence, and then we're going to take things, move it to your zone of competence. This is usually the time where, for the majority of business owners, starting to look at not just what can you automate and not just what can you delete, because there will be something new you can delete. There will be something new you can automate, but oftentimes this is also when it makes sense to look at what can you delegate and what can you start to bring on support around. I find one of the ways people really limit their capacity to sustainably scale is the fear that comes up around delegating and bringing on support. And often this is where we hear the phrase, what got you here won't get you to where you want to go next. I talked about this. I was on Emma Louise, she's in our Facebook group. I was on her podcast like last week or the week before. What's it called? The introverted, I'm blanking on the name. What is the name of that? The Ambitious Introvert podcast. I'm like, it'll come to me. I'll drop the link for that. It was a really great conversation. But one of the things we were talking about is this whole idea of what got you here won't get you to where you want to go next. And so when you're going from building to growing, I find one of the things we have to be mindful of, what got you here, what gets you to where you want to go next, is literally what we were just talking about, where when you're building, you might have to have your fingers in all the pot, right? You might have to be a little bit more in that zone of competence. You might have to be both the CEO and the service provider and the team member, right? You might have to be all of those roles and put in a little more sweat equity, but that literally what allowed you to build your business and get to the place where you're growing. If you continue to act like you're building your business while you're growing your business, that is literally the thing that will sabotage you and stall your ability to grow. And so I find this is the stage where so many of my clients, I'm supporting them around really working through the fear and working through what comes up around investing in support. Because for most business owners, what I find, this is the case with coaching as well, right? Whether you're investing in a coach or you're investing in getting your website done or you're investing in your first VA or your first OBM, most of the time we have to invest first and then results come later. And usually if you wait to invest until after you already have the results, you've waited too long. You've probably cost your business an F ton of money, an F ton of time, right? The longer we wait to invest in the things we need, usually the more we slow down not only our ability to grow and scale, but often also we leave a massive amount of money on the table. Because we'll use this as an example. If you've moved so many more things into your zone of excellence and your zone of competence, and you're trying to hold all of those things, and you're doing all the things you could pay someone who their zone of genius is doing some of the zone of competence tasks, what you're really doing is limiting your capacity to earn income. This is where so many business owners stall their ability to bring money on the table. And so let's say you cost your business, by trying to save money, you cost your business, let's say you save $1,000 a month. I'm just making up this amount, right? But you might be costing your business $10,000 a month in potential revenue because you're trying to save that $1,000. And so I think this is what happens a lot at the growing phase, because it's such a mind fuck, because literally what got you usually to the growing phase is being willing to do some of those zone of competence tasks, being willing to wear all of those hats, being willing to do all of those roles. And that very thing that got you to growing is the very thing that will actually sabotage you from moving from growing and scaling. Does that track for everyone? Does that logic make sense? And so I think this is why it's really important for us to understand what stage of business we're at. We want to both not scale before we're ready to scale by offering on scaling offers, but we also want to make sure if we're now growing that we're not trying to treat our business like a business that is just being built. Again, is this tracking for everyone? And this is where I think this framework is so useful, because if you can keep looking at what stage am I at in business and how am I looking to expand my time in my zone of genius, move things from my zone of genius down into my zone of excellence, from my zone of excellence down to my zone of competence. Suddenly my zone of competence is overcrowded. And my job is to keep looking at zone of competence. Really, when you're in the growing phase, your job is to look at, as much as possible, how can I delete, automate, and outsource my zone of competence? Because if you can do that really efficiently and really well, and move through all the fear that comes up, right? What got you here won't get you where you want to go next, and understand that. That is what is going to allow you to build your business or grow your business to the phase where you can scale. Are we following? When you're scaling your business, this is the place where, again, we are looking at how can we spend the majority of our time as a CEO and service provider in that zone of excellence work, whether that is wearing the CEO hat or being in your craft, but how can we expand so the majority of your time is in your zone of genius work? When you're building, it might be you still are doing some zone of genius, some zone of excellence, and your goal is to delete, automate, delegate as much of your zone of competence as possible. When we are scaling, right, that zone of genius capacity, if we have 100% here, right, we're looking at like, how is 90% of your time in your zone of genius? Which means there's only 10% left. That really better be your zone of excellence. We better have outsourced all of or deleted and delegated the zone of competence. We're expanding zone of genius, but we're narrowing that. That means we're shoving more into zone of excellence. But that means zone of excellence has to start being also deleted, delegated, and automated, right? We are expanding now that time in the scaling of your business. And this is how you create sustainability. Because if you are looking at this is not just about like working smarter, not harder. It's also about really being mindful to be in your genius more and more, which is also going to be the stuff that's easier for you, lights you up more, that only you can do, that allows you to bring in more revenue. Your zone of genius might look very different than my zone of genius, which might look different than someone else's zone of genius, right? We have to be very mindful. We don't try to compare, because your zone of genius is where that is your money maker in your business. That is what will make it rain for you. But your zone of genius might literally be my zone of competence, right? My OBM's zone of genius is my zone of competence and excellence. I think that all makes sense here. So when you're scaling, we use the same framework, but I think we just keep expanding things, and we keep moving things from zone of genius, from zone of excellence down kind of this little, we think of this like a three, almost like a funnel here. And so zone of excellence and zone of competence, right? Like that just becomes the lower part of your funnel, and it gets smaller and smaller in percentage. And we just keep funneling out things, which means they either got to get, right? We either got to get rid of them, streamline, get rid of. We have to automate more and more, or we have to delegate more and more. And I think with scaling, where the what got you here won't get you to where you want to go next part, which also applies to mindset, obviously, which is, what we talk about the majority of the time. But even from a strategic standpoint and from an execution standpoint and from a team standpoint, when you're scaling, this is where things become, I think, just again, it's sort of like, oh, but there were all those things in your zone of excellence, and maybe even things that used to be your zone of genius, you've moved down to your zone of excellence that are now your zone of competence, that allowed you to grow your business. This is where the writing content piece example came in that we brought up earlier, right? When I started scaling my business, I think we've talked about this before, I will say the hardest thing for me to let go of has been certain things that I write. We brought on someone who I adore, who does the show notes for my podcast and repurposes some of that content. And I still edit it, I still look at it, I still obviously create the podcast, I still create the content. It is all my voice, it's everything there. However, literally allowing someone to go in and write those show notes for me and to go in and pull the content to repurpose from the podcast, that was so hard for me to let go of, because what got me here won't, what got you here won't get you to where you want to go next. However, that used to be, I would say, my zone of genius. The kind of got pushed to my zone of excellence, but it was something I'm like, this really helped get me here to an ability to scale. How could I let go of this thing? How could I trust someone else to do it? And this is where I want to share this with you, because every time we hold on to those pieces that aren't in our zone of genius, as we're moving through each phase and we're kind of moving things down that funnel, so to say, different than a sales funnel, right? We stall our ability to build, grow, and scale at every stage when we do that. And it was really interesting, like noticing how the longer I wanted to grip onto that as part of my zone of genius and not allow space for deepening into the few things in my zone of genius, and I wanted to hold on to more things in my zone of excellence, the more I was literally limiting my ability to scale my business. Because when you're scaling, it's not just about working smarter, not harder. Yes, that's true. And I think that's true when you're even looking at your team. How can you be efficient? Absolutely. But it's also looking at what are the things you're holding on to that don't need to be done by you in your business. What is not your genius? And how can you start to let go of those things? And this is where a lot of mindset comes in, because oftentimes those can be the things that are most challenging to let go of. But the more you try to hold on to the things that don't need to be done by you, the more you try to have your fingers in all of the pots, the more you try to stay in that zone of excellence, which probably feels way comfier than leaning fully into your zone of genius, the less you allow yourself to expand in your zone of genius, the more you literally limit your ability to scale and also your ability to sustainably scale. Right? You can scale, not sustainably. You can scale in a way that stresses your system out, where you're trying to do all the things, but I don't think that's what any one of us here wants to do. So I hope that makes sense there. Let me know if you have any questions around that, but that's just the example that comes up for me, because that was one quite transparently. It was probably the most challenging for me. But I think you could probably see from the outside looking in, if I work with clients one-on-one, if my genius is coaching, if my genius is supporting people with the mindset, strategy, and action, and the clarity that goes into building, growing, and scaling a profitable business, everything we're talking about here, and it's really deeply supporting my clients, and then, creating, I wouldn't even say creating content is I would say that's a part of my genius, or maybe that's a part of that small sliver of, maybe it's part of my genius, but I would say a small sliver of my excellence to hold on to. We can see then how trying to do things like writing show notes for my podcast, yes, I can do that really well. I think I could do it really, really well. I'm excellent at doing that. But all of the time I spend doing that is time I literally can't spend serving my clients, or I can't spend in my CEO role working on my business, right? Helping be the visionary of my business, helping lead a team, helping lead us to that ability to scale. And I think, again, this is the part where it just becomes a little tricky, because it's what got you here won't get you to where you want to go next. But our brain has a very hard time, because while that logically makes sense, I think when you're sitting in it, your brain is also like, but this is the very thing that helped me get to here. Why would I let go of that? Why would I delete that? Why would I delegate that? Why would I outsource that? Why would I let go of the very thing that's allowed me to first build my business, then grow my business, then scale my business? And so I want to bring that here, because I think this is where the framework can be very useful, because it can help you have a little bit more of just an understanding of why that would be the case. And also so you can understand, super, super normal if that comes up for you. I think that's a very normal thing we hold on to, but also so you can understand why that shifts and why certain things make sense to let go of at different stages of your business. Just trying to see if there is anything else I wanted to share here with you. I did write notes, but I didn't look at these at all today. I think we went through the main thing here. We've been talking for an hour. I gotta go vote in a moment. So let me put a cap on this for us. So again, as we are looking at business, every stage of business is beautiful. We are not racing to get to the next stage. run your own race, embrace each stage that you're at. Building, growing, and scaling all ask different things from us, but they are all beautiful stages of business. And remember, if we try to grow or scale before we build, that is actually a way we can really sabotage our whole business and our ability to bring in revenue, to bring in sustainability, to bring in profit, to have longevity in our business. And then this framework we're talking about is really looking at and starting to understand, to become more and more intimate and more clear, and have more awareness around your zone of genius, your zone of excellence, your zone of competence. Your zone of genius is also, I think of that as alignment as well. For those of you who I'm obsessed with alignment. And that's helpful for your brain to wrap around that. And at each phase, we are looking at, usually in the building phase, it's almost like equally parceled between your zone of genius, excellence, and competence. And as we move through the phases of business, we're looking at how do we keep expanding the zone of genius, moving something from the zone of genius, expanding the zone of genius time, I should say, the percentage of time there, minimizing what we're focusing on in our zone of genius, moving that down to zone of excellence, moving something from zone of excellence down to zone of competence, right? It's just kind of like this funnel that moves down, and continuing to look at expanding time, the percentage of time in your zone of genius, and then looking to automate, delegate, and delete more and more what is in your zone of competence first, and then your zone of excellence. And this can be a really simple way to be able to make decisions in your business that will allow you to build, grow, and sustainably scale, I should say, a profitable business on your terms. So I hope this is useful and helpful. If you have questions, reflections, leave them for me. And then, as always, if this is something you do want support with, if you're like, oh, this is really interesting, I'm building my business, I'm growing my business, I'm scaling my business, I could use some support. And I know I could use some support with everything we're talking about here, understanding my zone of genius, how to be in that more, but also with the clarity, mindset, strategy, and action that does go into each phase of business. Because I think each phase, there is definitely strategy involved, and there's always about 90% mindset that's involved, so that you're getting out of your own way and you're really continuing to lean into, to own your magic, to own your genius. That is what I support my clients with. My clients get amazing results. We have a lot of fun as well. They do everything from, book their first paying clients ever, all the way up to scaling to $1 million plus, and everywhere in between. I work with clients at every stage of business. I don't have a preference. I know someone asked me recently, because I have a revenue share model where I charge a base rate plus a percentage of what clients make while working together, what they generate while working together. And I know sometimes there's a concern, or it seems like there must be a prerequisite that I only work with clients at a certain stage of business. That is not true at all. The beautiful thing about the revenue share model is we grow that revenue together. It meets you where you're at, and it continues to meet you where you're at as your business goes from building to growing and scaling. I love every stage of business, and there is, it's not like I prefer one over the other. So if that is you and you are looking for support, I've been fully booked for years. We tend to have, spots open up from time to time. I do believe we have a spot opening up in July, and we are opening up an intensive. I like to open up an intensive per month, and I do have an intensive for sure in July. It's opening up. I don't know for sure if we have a one-on-one spot in July. We definitely do in August opening up. Anyway, either way, whenever there's an availability, book a discovery call. I would love to chat with you. Fit is really important to me, so I will definitely ensure it's a fit, and if so, you can snag that next spot as it becomes available. And if it's not a fit, I always tell people I work with incredible coaches. I work with incredible people I really trust. I'm always happy to also refer anyone out who's maybe not quite the right fit. I believe in coaching chemistry. It's a real thing, just like dating chemistry. So if it's not quite the right fit for what you're looking for, I'm always happy to refer you out to someone who I know is incredible at the work they do. So if that is you, I'll drop that link for that. And then don't forget, if you leave a comment below, you will be entered to win a free copy of my 6-week sales course, Sell Out Without Feeling Like a Sellout. And then I'll be back next week with another topic for y'all. I love you all so much. If it is a voting day for you, go out and vote. Please, please, please go vote, go vote, go vote. Love y'all. Bye.